Previous games set in Middle-earth had you play as a great swordsman or a deadly archer. This time around you're playing as a little creature known as Gollum. I was curious to see if it was genuinely awful or simply mind-numbingly boring like others have said, and after playing through the campaign, it's actually somewhat both in the worst way imaginable. To be completely blunt, the Lord of the Rings Gollum is terrible at everything. Its many flaws include extremely uninspiring gameplay, uninteresting narrative, wonky animations, ugly character models, poor visual appeal, etc. It would have been unimpressive years ago, let alone now. The story follows the events that occur between the Hobbit and the Fellowship of the Ring. Gollum has been captured and imprisoned. While imprisoned, he is met by Gandalf, who wants to hear about his adventures. The two speak throughout the game, providing a narrative background while the players relive the recent past through Gollum's perspective. It turns out to be a rather appealing method to tell a story, if only the events recapped were interesting. Let's start with the gameplay. The entire game is focused on being sneaky because Gollum is not a fighter. Simply moving from one shadowy area to another, occasionally climbing walls, and sometimes throwing a stone to distract guards is all you can do. It never really advances beyond these basic stealth concepts. The only ability you really have is Gollum's intuition, which shows you the direction to go and highlights enemies. There isn't much combat other than sometimes taking out orcs who aren't wearing helmets, but if you get caught, it's an instant game over. The platforming is miserable. Grabbable walls and non-grabbable surfaces blur together, making it difficult to see where you should leap. The adventure includes several straightforward, uninteresting puzzles. I basically had experienced everything the game had to offer during the first hour of play. As you continue through the story, Gollum doesn't learn any new skills or powers. Making matters worse are the strict linear levels that rob you of any freedom to explore. There is just one way to advance in this game, and if you deviate from the clearly marked path, you will be rewarded with a game over screen. The game's first few chapters are certainly the worst, and I don't believe half the people could get over how boring it was and probably stopped playing by then. You're stuck in a prison camp, doing meaningless jobs in a dull environment. The latter chapters are better thanks to the elven scenery being more vibrant and colorful. Last but not least, there's a unique feature in which Smeagol and Gollum argue among themselves, forcing you to make a decision that won't truly affect how things turn out. It's a clever concept, but it's poorly implemented. Now let's get to my favorite part of my videos, talking about the flaws. I know the most obvious things are the visuals or the story, and that's probably what you guys might be thinking I'm gonna bring up first, but those are just too obvious. For me, the craziest thing about the game is that the lore is locked behind a paywall. It is absolutely insane to release a game this awful and charge $90 for a deluxe version that just offers more voice acting and a lore compendium. I will never accept the fact that the developers were unaware of how terrible it would be. I truly believe that the only reason this game was released was to make up the money they knew they had lost on it. They knew the game was so bad that they actually apologized. In a statement, they said they wanted to sincerely apologize for the underwhelming experience players had with the game upon release, and that they acknowledge and deeply regret that the game did not meet expectations that they set for themselves or for the community. The game saves at random, which may be irritating, especially if it saves immediately before you fail. If that happens, and I guarantee you it will, you will have the fun pleasure of starting the whole chapter over again. Now, the actual real villain in this game is the camera. It leaves you with little room to fine-tune it to exactly what you want. Trust me, I know it sounds silly, but if you've played this game, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the visuals aren't that great. It looks like an indie game that was made for an Xbox 360 that you'd see in the bargain bin. Muddy visuals blend together and textures won't load, making everything look like a blurry mess. But nothing beats how goofy Gollum looks. Normally, I complain about games being too short, but in this case, the game is really too long. You don't need the full 10 hours to beat the story at all. They could have cut 6 hours since the story was bland and it still would have dragged on. The main reason it took me so long to beat it was that playing it seemed like a chore, but I try to finish games I start, so I push through the agony. Let me also not forget to mention the game's biggest feature: frequent crashes. This was one of the first next-gen games announced in 2019, and somehow after all that time, still needed a few more years to fully finish it. Future updates and fixes may solve the flaws, but given the mediocre gameplay, I fail to see how Gollum can be saved at all. It's not enjoyable when it works, and it's much less enjoyable when it doesn't. How this game was even given the go-ahead baffles me. The overall idea of the game feels so pointless. I'm not aware of anyone who was eager to learn what Gollum was up to, and if they had been, I'd at least hope they were anticipating something far more intriguing than this. I wouldn't even recommend it if it were free. So I think it's safe to say that the Lord of the Rings Gollum is not worth your time or your money. But that's all I got, and as always, thank you, I appreciate you, and I will see you guys in the next video.